Welcome back. I'm Elaine Quijano. CBSN Washington reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns is my co-anchor tonight. Hi again, Caitlin.
Hi, thanks, Elaine. Thanks again for having me. President Biden has authorized new sanctions against Russia. It comes a day after intelligence officials listed the country as one of the top 2 threats facing the U.S., along with China. Natalie Brand reports from the White House.
The Biden administration announced sweeping new sanctions targeting Russia in retaliation for its cyber attacks and interference in the 2020 election.
Our objective here is to impose costs for what we feel are unacceptable actions by the Russian government.
The sanctions target more than 30 individuals and entities. The State Department is also expelling 10 Russian diplomats and intelligence officials stationed in the U.S.
When we push back with our allies and partners, we obviously increase the cost and we increase the delegitimization of essentially those types of activities.
President Biden had a phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Tuesday in which he warned actions would be coming and raised concerns about Russian military buildup along the border with Ukraine. The administration also says it's responding to reports that Russia encouraged Taliban attacks against U.S. personnel in Afghanistan.
We, of course, will not stand by and accept the targeting of our personnel by any elements, including a foreign state actor. This information really puts the burden on Russia and the Russian government to explain their engagement here.
Secretary of State Tony Blinken made a surprise visit to Kabul this morning and addressed concerns, including some from the intelligence community that Afghanistan could descend into civil war and become a safe haven for terrorists after U.S. troops pull out.
The consequences of that future are literally in no one's interest.
President Biden announced Wednesday he's withdrawing all U.S. troops from the country by September 11th. Natalie Brand, CBS News, the White House.
For more on this, let's bring in Nina Krushcheva. She's a professor of international affairs at the New School, and she's also the granddaughter of the former Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so glad to have your expertise with this news this week. Let's start here. President Biden proposed a meeting with President Putin at a summit in Europe in the near future. Do you think that these sanctions complicate that summit in any way? And what does it mean for diplomatic relationships beyond that?
Well, I'm sure it complicates the meeting, and the Russians already responded that suggesting a meeting and then 2 days later sanctioning Russia would probably doesn't bode well for that proposed meeting. It doesn't mean that after some consideration, Russians wouldn't decide that the meeting is a good thing to have and probably would come up with their own terms to have it. But certainly for now, the way it stands, there is a complication. And I wonder, I mean, we wouldn't know because in the readouts on both sides, they didn't say it, but I wonder if President Biden, in fact, warned Putin that the sanctions are coming that quickly. And so they should be prepared with their response. So far, the Russians seem to not surprised and kind of explain it as Biden has to do it and what else to expect from the United States.
Question to keep an eye on. Well, on Thursday, the U.S. dropped plans to send 2 Navy destroyers on a routine trip through the Black Sea. They cited tensions between Russia and Ukraine. So what is happening in the region that may be a cause for concern?
Well, there is a lot of cause for concern. I mean, Russian troops are in fact, they're different counting, I think, from 4,000 extra military personnel to 40,000, depending on who you listen to. But it is on the border with Ukraine, sort of expecting that Ukraine itself wants to destabilize the situation on the border, which is not really out of the realm of a possibility because Ukraine did begin its own buildup before Russian came through. And so the Russian response from where Russians stand is exactly what it should be, because Ukraine early announced that they would be NATO exercises in May on the border. So it's President Zelensky, Ukrainian president, should have expected that that Russia will react or Putin will react that way. I think for him, the important thing is to bring Russia to the position when then Ukraine can go around the world and say, we need to get protected. Joe Biden promised to protect us, and look at the Russians, they're doing that. So I think in this particular case, it certainly takes two do tango, and so the expectations of the war are very present, but at the same time, it seems that it's more of a political game, a very dangerous political game, rather than the war game at this stage.
Well, a lot of big foreign policy news this week. Secretary of State Antony Blinken made a surprise visit to Afghanistan just after the president announced plans to withdraw remaining U.S. forces from the region by September 11th. Here's what he had to say about the path forward.
Well, first, I think one of the things that we know from our experience of the last 20 years is that there is no military solution to the conflict that remains here. The only path forward to a durable, lasting, and just end to the conflict is through negotiation, is through a political agreement, and ultimately is through compromise. And I hope that the Taliban understands that as well.
So tying this all together, how does Afghanistan's future factor into the U.S. relationship with Russia?
Well, it is kind of an interesting statement because he says that there is no path forward by military solution, and yet the United States promises Ukraine military help. So it's kind of an interesting thing. You're tired of that war. Are you ready to get into the other one on the eastern border of Europe? So that, by the way, really didn't get unnoticed by the Russians. Another thing, I think in earlier report, there was one of the pieces of information is that Russia may or may not have paid the Taliban fighters to kill American soldiers. There are very little evidence for that. In fact, the American document itself says that low to medium probability. And then James Psaki comes out and says, well, but it's the burden of proof on the Russians. And the Russians like, wait a minute, you haven't proved anything. Why it is the burden of proof on the Russians? So I think what we can be sure about when the United States withdraws from somewhere, there is an open space remain. And we've seen over 20 years with Vladimir Putin, the minute he sees an opening, he gets in. I don't know how he's going to get in, but that withdrawal for the United States will probably become very complicated, will be turned very complicated by the Russians. They did it in Syria. They did it in, where else did they did it in Central Asia. And so I think that scenario is going to be played out in Afghanistan right now.
Well, as a professor of international affairs, I'm curious, what are your impressions of how the Biden administration's foreign policy agenda is shaping up at this point?
Well, I think Biden, so far, he has been doing everything he said he will be doing. He will keep negotiations going. He will keep diplomacy going. I mean, sometimes it's a little awkward the way it comes out. So you talk to Putin and then you put on sanctions. But at the same time, what it does, I think, and I don't know if it's going to be positive result. I don't think there would be any positive result with any potential Russian-American relations as long as Putin is president. But what it really does, it keeps Russia on its toes. It keeps Russia kind of thinking what the next step would be. Shall we agree with this kind of tango dance and do-si-do, or we are going to come with other formulas that Americans are not ready for. And I think that in this dealing with Russia this way is probably not a bad solution. The same, I think, goes for China, is that we're going to negotiate in America. We're going to negotiate when we need to, but we really stand firm on things we believe in. So far, I would give Joe Biden probably, I'd say B+, which is maybe a little too generous, but I'm willing to go with that.
So room for improvement, to be sure. Thank you so much for your time today, Nina Krushcheva. We really appreciate your expertise on this. Thank you.